Superman Tower of Power Incident. On June 21, 2007, 13-year-old Caitlin Lassiter arrived at Six Flags Kentucky Kingdom with her family for what should have been a perfect summer day. The Louisville amusement park was bustling with visitors eager to escape the heat on the various rides and attractions. Caitlin, an active middle school student from nearby Elizabethtown, had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. She was particularly excited about the Superman Tower of Power, the park's signature thrill ride that dominated the skyline at 177 feet tall. The Superman Tower of Power was considered one of the most popular attractions at Kentucky Kingdom. The ride worked by seating passengers in a circular gondola with their feet dangling freely beneath them. A sophisticated cable and pulley system would lift riders to the top of the tower, pause for a moment to build suspense, then release them into a controlled free fall back toward the ground. The sensation of weightlessness combined with the panoramic view of Louisville made it a must-ride attraction for thrill seekers. Safety harnesses secured riders around their torso and shoulders, while their legs hung unrestrained below the seats. Caitlin joined the line with her family members, watching as previous groups of riders screamed with delight during their descent. The ride operators went through their routine safety checks, ensuring all harnesses were properly secured before initiating the lifting sequence. Everything appeared normal as Caitlin's group was loaded into the gondola seats. The massive tower stretched high above them, and she could feel the anticipation building as the ride began its slow ascent. At approximately 40 feet above the ground, something went catastrophically wrong. One of the main support cables suddenly snapped under tension, creating a whip-like effect as the severed cable lashed across the ride's gondola. The steel cable, moving at tremendous speed and force, struck multiple riders before they could react. In an instant, what had been a moment of anticipation turned into absolute horror. Caitlin bore the worst of the cable's impact. The severed steel wire struck her legs with such force that both feet were completely amputated above the ankles. The other riders in the gondola screamed in terror as they witnessed the unthinkable accident unfold. Blood immediately began flowing from Caitlin's severe injuries while she remained conscious and aware of what had happened to her. The ride operators, seeing the emergency situation, immediately halted the lifting mechanism and began emergency descent procedures. Park security and medical personnel rushed to the scene as soon as the gondola returned to ground level. Caitlin remained remarkably calm despite her traumatic injuries, even asking about her severed feet. Emergency medical technicians quickly applied tourniquets and began life-saving treatment while preparing her for immediate transport to University Hospital. The other passengers, though physically unharmed, were deeply traumatized by witnessing such a horrific accident. The Superman Tower of Power was immediately shut down pending a full investigation. Caitlin survived her injuries but faced a lifetime of challenges adapting to her permanent disability. The accident led to industry-wide reviews of cable inspection procedures and ride safety protocols. Six Flags ultimately settled with the family for an undisclosed amount, while the ride was permanently removed from the park. The incident became a watershed moment for amusement park safety standards across the entire industry. Big Dipper roller coaster derailment incident. On May 30th, 1972, families across London flocked to Battersea Fun Fair to celebrate the holiday weekend. The popular amusement park located along the Thames had been a beloved destination for generations of Londoners seeking thrills and entertainment. Among the fair's most popular attractions was the Big Dipper, a classic wooden roller coaster that had been delighting visitors since 1951. The aging ride, with its traditional white-painted wooden structure and steep drops, represented the golden age of British seaside entertainment. The Big Dipper stood as a testament to post-war optimism, built when the country was recovering and families were eager for simple pleasures. The coaster featured a series of hills and curves typical of wooden coasters from that era, reaching speeds of approximately 35 miles per hour. Its cars could hold up to 20 passengers at a time, and on busy days like this holiday weekend, the ride operated continuously with minimal downtime between cycles. The wooden track, supported by an intricate framework of timber beams and cross braces, had weathered more than 2 decades of London's harsh climate. Among the holiday crowd were several families with children, including groups of teenagers who had come to the fair specifically for the thrill rides. The Big Dipper's line stretched long on this busy afternoon, with excited riders waiting their turn to experience the classic coaster. Many of these visitors had ridden the Big Dipper countless times over the years, trusting in its familiar rhythms and well-worn safety record. The ride operators, following their standard procedures, loaded passengers into the train cars and secured the simple lap bars that served as the primary restraint system. As the fully loaded train climbed the first major hill, building potential energy for the exciting descent ahead, passengers could see across the Thames and the London skyline beyond. The mechanical chain lift carried them steadily upward with its characteristic clicking sound. Everything seemed perfectly normal as the train crested the first hill and began picking up speed on the downward slope. The familiar sensations of acceleration and mild airtime brought squeals of delight from the passengers. Then, as the train approached a banked curve at high speed, catastrophic structural failure occurred. A critical section of the wooden track structure collapsed without warning, unable to support the dynamic forces of the speeding train. The lead cars immediately derailed, leaving the track entirely and plummeting toward the ground below. Passengers were thrown from their seats as the cars tumbled and crashed into the support structure beneath the track. The wooden framework, never designed to catch falling train cars, splintered and collapsed under the impact. 5 people died instantly from the devastating crash, while 13 others sustained serious injuries ranging from broken bones to severe trauma. The screams of the injured and terrified witnesses filled the air as park staff and visitors rushed to help. Emergency services arrived quickly, but the tangled wreckage of wooden beams, twisted metal, and overturned train cars made rescue efforts extremely difficult. Some victims remained trapped beneath the debris for hours, while rescue workers carefully dismantled the collapsed structure. The investigation that followed revealed that structural fatigue and inadequate maintenance had compromised the ride's safety. The wooden support beams had deteriorated over the years, weakened by weather exposure and the constant stress of train operations. Following this tragedy, the Big Dipper was permanently removed and Battersea Fun Fair never reopened. The incident led to comprehensive safety reforms throughout the British amusement industry, establishing new standards for ride inspection and maintenance that continue to protect visitors today. Verrückt waterslide death incident. On August 7, 2016, 10-year-old Caleb Schwab arrived at Schlitterbahn Water Park in Kansas City with his family for what should have been a fun-filled summer day. Caleb was the son of Scott Schwab, a Kansas state legislator, and like many children his age, he was drawn to the park's most famous attraction. Towering above the water park, at 168 feet and 7 inches tall, stood Verrückt, officially recognized as the world's tallest water slide. The German word Verrückt means insane, a name that proved to be tragically prophetic. Verrückt had opened just 2 years earlier amid great fanfare and media attention. The massive slide featured a unique multi-person raft system where 3 riders would be secured together in a specially designed inflatable raft. The ride began with a steep 17-story drop, followed by a second hill that created a moment of weightlessness before the final descent into a splash pool. The slide's designers had incorporated overhead safety netting along portions of the ride to prevent rafts from becoming airborne, a safety feature that acknowledged the extreme forces generated by the attraction. The ride's operation depended on precise weight distribution among the 3 passengers. Safety guidelines specified that the combined weight of all riders should fall within a specific range to ensure the raft maintained proper contact with the slide surface throughout the journey. However, these weight requirements were often loosely enforced during busy periods, and park staff frequently allowed combinations of riders that fell outside the recommended parameters. On this particular day, the park was crowded with families enjoying the summer heat relief that the water attractions provided. Caleb was excited to experience the world record slide, despite being smaller than the typical rider. He was paired with 2 adult women in the 3-person raft, creating a weight distribution that was significantly below the recommended minimum. The raft was secured at the top of the 168-foot tower, with all 3 riders strapped in using Velcro and nylon restraints. Park attendants gave their standard safety briefing before releasing the raft down the steep initial drop. The raft accelerated rapidly down the first massive drop, reaching speeds approaching 70 miles per hour as it hit the bottom and began climbing the second hill. Due to the improper weight distribution, the raft carried too much momentum as it crested the second hill. Instead of following the slide's surface as designed, the raft became completely airborne for several feet. The lightweight raft, with insufficient weight to keep it grounded, flew upward toward the overhead safety netting that was meant to protect riders from exactly this scenario. Caleb, seated in the front of the raft, struck the metal supports of the overhead netting with devastating force. The impact caused fatal head and neck injuries, while the 2 adult passengers suffered serious but non-fatal injuries as the raft crashed back down onto the slide surface. Park staff immediately initiated emergency procedures, but Caleb's injuries were beyond any medical intervention. The other riders were rushed to nearby hospitals for treatment of their injuries. Verrückt was immediately and permanently closed following the accident. The subsequent investigation revealed a pattern of safety violations and design flaws that had been ignored since the ride's construction. Criminal charges were filed against several park executives and the ride's designer for reckless behavior and second-degree murder. Evidence emerged showing that engineers had repeatedly warned about safety issues during construction, but these concerns were dismissed in favor of meeting opening deadlines. The slide was completely demolished in 2018, and the incident led to comprehensive reforms in waterslide safety regulations nationwide. Haunted Castle Fire Incident. On May 11, 1984, Six Flags Great Adventure in New Jersey was experiencing one of its busiest spring evenings of the season. The warm weather had drawn large crowds to the popular theme park, with families and groups of teenagers eager to experience the various rides and attractions. Among the park's most popular draws was the Haunted Castle, a walk-through dark ride that promised visitors a terrifying journey through a maze-like structure filled with ghosts, monsters, and other frightening surprises. The attraction had become a must-visit destination for thrill-seekers looking for a different kind of adrenaline rush. The Haunted Castle was housed in a large castle-themed building that had been constructed as a temporary structure, but had remained in operation for several years. Inside, visitors would navigate through a series of narrow corridors, dark rooms, and tight passages while costumed actors and mechanical effects provided scares along the way. The building's interior was decorated with foam padding, fabric hangings, and various props designed to create an authentically spooky atmosphere. These decorative materials, while effective for creating the desired ambiance, were highly flammable and had never been treated with fire-resistant chemicals. 8 teenagers, including a group of friends from nearby towns, had decided to experience the haunted castle together that evening. They were typical of the attraction's target demographic, young people seeking thrills and the social bonding that comes from shared scary experiences. The group purchased their tickets and joined the line outside the castle's entrance, joking nervously about what they might encounter inside. None of them could have imagined that this routine visit to a popular theme park attraction would end in tragedy. The building's design created several inherent safety hazards that would prove fatal. The maze-like layout included numerous dead ends and confusing pathways intended to disorient visitors as part of the entertainment experience. However, this same design made emergency evacuation extremely difficult, as there were very limited exit routes and no clear sightlines of safety. The building lacked a sprinkler system, smoke detection equipment, and adequate emergency lighting that would have been required in permanent structures housing public attractions. Shortly after 6:30 p.m., a small fire began in one of the foam-padded walls deep within the attraction. The exact cause was never definitively determined, but investigators suspected that either an electrical malfunction or a discarded cigarette had ignited the highly combustible foam materials. Within minutes, the flames spread rapidly through the interconnected rooms and corridors, fed by the abundant flammable decorations and furniture throughout the structure. The building quickly filled with thick, toxic smoke that made visibility nearly impossible. Visitors inside the attraction initially thought the smoke and heat were part of the show, as special effects were commonly used to enhance the scary atmosphere. By the time people realized they were in genuine danger, the fire had spread extensively, blocking many of the limited exit routes. The maze-like interior, designed to confuse visitors under normal circumstances, became a death trap as panicked people tried desperately to find their way out through the smoke-filled corridors. The 8 teenagers became separated and lost in the burning maze. Despite the efforts of emergency responders who arrived quickly at the scene, all 8 young people died from smoke inhalation before they could be rescued. The victims ranged in age from 15 to 18 years old, their lives cut short by a preventable tragedy that exposed serious gaps in amusement park safety regulations. The investigation that followed revealed numerous safety violations and regulatory failures. The structure had been approved as a temporary building but had operated for years without meeting permanent building codes. Criminal charges were filed against several park officials, and the incident led to comprehensive reforms in fire safety requirements for all amusement park attractions nationwide. The tragedy at the Haunted Castle became a turning point that fundamentally changed how the industry approaches safety in entertainment venues. Worlds of Fun Decapitation Incident. On June 7, 1981, Worlds of Fun amusement park in Kansas City was operating under typical summer conditions with moderate crowds enjoying the various attractions throughout the facility. The park's signature roller coaster, the Orient Express, had been thrilling visitors since its opening, featuring a unique design that included multiple inversions and high-speed elements that made it one of the most popular rides in the Midwest. The coaster's distinctive red and yellow trains regularly carried passengers through a series of loops, corkscrews, and banking turns that provided an intense but generally safe riding experience for thousands of visitors each operating season. William Haithcote was a 20-year-old seasonal maintenance worker who had been employed at the park for several weeks. Like many young people working summer jobs at amusement parks, he was eager to prove himself reliable and thorough in his duties. William had been assigned to perform routine maintenance inspections on various rides throughout the park, a responsibility that required him to examine track conditions, mechanical components, and safety systems to ensure everything was functioning properly. These inspections were typically scheduled during off-peak hours, or when rides were temporarily shut down for maintenance purposes. On this particular afternoon, William was conducting what should have been a routine inspection of the Orient Express roller coaster. The standard protocol required that all ride operations cease completely before any maintenance personnel entered the restricted areas around the track. Multiple safety procedures were in place to prevent exactly the type of accident that was about to occur, including communication systems between ride operators and maintenance staff, physical lockout procedures for ride controls, and clearly marked boundaries that separated operational areas from maintenance zones. The Orient Express continued to operate normally, with trains full of passengers completing their circuits through the various inversions and high-speed sections of the track. The ride operators in the control booth maintained their standard monitoring procedures, watching for any irregularities in the ride's operation while managing the loading and dispatching of successive trains. The mechanical systems functioned exactly as designed, with block zones and safety sensors ensuring that trains maintained proper spacing and operated within safe parameters. Something went catastrophically wrong with the communication and safety protocols that should have prevented any maintenance worker from entering a restricted area while the ride remained operational. Williams somehow gained access to an area immediately adjacent to the active roller coaster track, placing himself directly in the path of the speeding trains. Whether this was due to a breakdown in communication between departments, inadequate training on safety procedures, or a momentary lapse in judgment, the result was the same. As one of the Orient Express trains rounded a curve at full operational speed, it struck William with tremendous force. The impact was instantly fatal, causing severe trauma that resulted in his decapitation. The passengers on the train experienced the horrific shock of witnessing this tragic accident, while the ride operators immediately initiated emergency shutdown procedures upon realizing what had occurred. The train was brought to a stop as quickly as the safety systems allowed, and emergency services were summoned to the scene. The immediate aftermath of the accident sent shockwaves throughout the amusement park industry. Worlds of Fun permanently closed the Orient Express and conducted a comprehensive review of all safety procedures and training protocols. The investigation revealed critical failures in the communication systems and safety procedures that should have prevented any maintenance worker from accessing restricted areas during ride operation. Criminal charges were considered, though the focus ultimately shifted to implementing systematic changes that would prevent similar tragedies. The incident led to industry-wide reforms in maintenance safety protocols, including mandatory lockout-tagout procedures, improved communication systems between departments, and enhanced training requirements for all personnel working in proximity to operating rides. William Heathcote's death became a catalyst for fundamental changes in how amusement parks approach worker safety, establishing standards that continue to protect maintenance personnel today. Crushed behind the magic. Deborah Stone was 18 years old when she started her dream job as a hostess at Disneyland's America Sings attraction in 1974. The ride was a rotating theater showcasing the history of American music through animatronic characters. Guests sat in a moving outer ring that rotates to different scenes, while the inner section was stationary. Between each scene, large walls would move, creating temporary darkness as the next set appeared. On July 8th, just 2 weeks after the attraction opened, Deborah was stationed between the stationary wall and one of the rotating platforms. Her job was simple: guide guests and ensure the show ran smoothly. What wasn't simple was the engineering flaw that would turn deadly. The gap between the moving and stationary walls was just 12 inches at its narrowest point, a space that left no margin for error. At approximately 10:30 p.m., as one scene transitioned to the next, something went wrong. Deborah became caught in the narrow space as the massive wall began its rotation. Security cameras didn't cover this backstage area. There was no emergency stop button within her reach. The hydraulic system powering the rotation exerted thousands of pounds of pressure, designed to move regardless of minor obstructions. Guests in the theater heard screams coming from behind the walls. Many assumed it was part of the show's sound effects. The walls continued their mechanical movement, crushing Deborah between them with inexorable force. The compression was catastrophic. Her ribcage collapsed first, puncturing her lungs and heart. Within seconds, the pressure fractured her spine and pelvis. By the time other cast members realized something was wrong and stopped the ride, it was too late. When maintenance workers finally separated the walls, they found Deborah's body grotesquely flattened, blood pooling on the floor beneath her. Medical examiners later determined she remained conscious for nearly 40 seconds, as her body was slowly crushed, experiencing excruciating pain before death finally came. The next day, America Sings reopened with new safety lights and proximity sensors. Deborah's death became a grim reminder of the machinery behind Disney's magic. The derailment disaster. Marcelo Torres was 22 years old when he visited Disneyland with friends on September 5, 2003. The California native chose to ride Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, one of the park's signature attractions. The Gold Rush-themed coaster was designed to simulate a runaway mine train, reaching speeds of 30 miles per hour as it twisted through artificial caverns and desert landscapes. Torres settled into the front row of the first passenger car, directly behind the locomotive. What Torres couldn't know was that maintenance crews had been performing improper repairs on the ride for months. The previous night, mechanics had replaced a critical wheel assembly, but failed to install a required safety wire that would keep the axle in place. No supervisor had checked the work. As the train climbed the third lift hill, the unwired axle began to work loose from its housing. At 11:22 a.m., as the train crested the hill and began its descent, the front locomotive's undercarriage violently separated from its chassis. Metal screeched against metal as the cars behind it, still moving at full speed, slammed into the derailed engine. The first passenger car, where Torres sat, bore the brunt of the impact. The locomotive's weight crushed inward, compressing the space where Torres was seated. The collision fractured Torres's chest and ribs with such force that bone fragments punctured his heart and lungs. He remained conscious as blood filled his chest cavity, each breath becoming more difficult than the last. Medical examiners later found that Torres did not die instantly, but suffocated over approximately 2 minutes as his lungs collapsed. Nearby passengers, many with broken bones and facial lacerations, watched helplessly as he struggled to breathe. When paramedics finally reached the scene, they found Torres still strapped in his seat, his body contorted by the crushed compartment. Blood had soaked through his clothing and pooled on the ride's track below. His friends, seated just behind him, had suffered only minor injuries, a difference of mere inches between life and death. The Boy Who Fell from the Mountain. Mark Maples was 15 years old when he visited Disneyland with his family on January 3, 1964. The Matterhorn bobsleds had been operating for nearly 6 years by then, thrilling guests with its 80-foot drops and sharp turns that simulated an alpine adventure. The steel-tracked ride, themed after Switzerland's iconic mountain, was the first tubular steel roller coaster in the world. Mark and his friend boarded a bobsled car in the afternoon, securing the simple lap belt that was the ride's only restraint system. As the bobsled climbed the initial lift hill, Mark was visibly excited. Other passengers in nearby sleds later reported that he had been daring his friend to raise their hands during the drops. The cars reached the top of the first hill, preparing for the signature plunge that made the ride famous. What happened next occurred in just seconds. At the crest of the hill, as the bobsled began to pick up speed, Mark suddenly stood up. Whether it was a moment of teenage bravado or a misunderstanding about the ride's mechanics remains unknown. The physics were unforgiving. As the sled pitched downward at 20 miles per hour, Mark lost his balance. His center of gravity shifted forward and the momentum pulled him completely out of the vehicle. Mark fell approximately 30 feet before striking the steel track below. Primary impact was to his skull, causing an immediate depressed cranial fracture. Bone fragments were driven deep into his frontal lobe. Though the brain damage was catastrophic, death was not instantaneous. Medical examiners later determined that Mark remained alive for at least 2 minutes after impact, his breathing shallow and irregular as his brain began to swell inside his shattered skull. Ride operators found him splayed across the track, still conscious but unable to move or speak. Blood pooled beneath his head, running down the manufactured mountainside in thin rivulets. By the time the park's medical team arrived, Mark had slipped into a deep coma. He was transported to a nearby hospital where, despite emergency surgery to relieve the pressure on his brain, he died 3 days later without ever regaining consciousness. Decapitated on the slopes, Dolly Young was 48 years old when she visited Disneyland in January 1984. The Matterhorn bobsleds had been one of the park's signature attractions for decades, and Dolly was eager to experience the Alpine-themed coaster again. The ride featured toboggan-style vehicles that raced through an artificial mountain at speeds approaching 30 miles per hour. Each 3-person bobsled was equipped with seatbelts, but ride operators didn't always verify they were fastened. On January 3rd, Dolly boarded a bobsled in the early afternoon. Whether she forgot to secure her seatbelt or it was improperly latched remains unclear. The ride began normally as her sled climbed the initial chain lift to the top of the mountain. At first, everything seemed fine. Then, as the vehicle navigated a sharp turn halfway through the ride, disaster struck. The bobsled hit a particularly rough section of track known for its jarring bumps. Dolly, without the security of a fastened seatbelt, was jolted upward. The momentum of the speeding vehicle combined with the centrifugal force of the turn was enough to lift her completely out of her seat. In an instant, she was thrown from the bobsled onto the cold metal track, her body splayed across the rails. For approximately 4 seconds, Dolly lay on the track, possibly conscious and aware of her predicament. Then came the sound of the next bobsled, already descending the mountain just 20 seconds behind hers. The oncoming vehicle had no time to stop. Its steel undercarriage struck Dolly's upper body with tremendous force. The impact severed her neck almost completely, leaving her head attached by only a few tendons and blood vessels. Blood sprayed across the white artificial snow, creating a ghastly contrast that would later haunt the ride operators who discovered her. The bobsled that struck her derailed partially, stranding its passengers above the grisly scene. Those riders reported hearing a sickening sound, part thud, part crack, as their vehicle hit what they initially thought was a piece of the ride's scenery. When emergency responders arrived, they found Dolly's body wedged beneath the derailed bobsled, her head twisted at an impossible angle. The coroner later determined that death was mercifully quick, resulting from immediate trauma to the spinal cord and massive hemorrhaging. The Toontown tragedy. Brandon Zucker was 4 years old when he visited Disneyland with his parents on September 22, 2000. The Roger Rabbit's cartoon spin ride had been operating in the park's Toontown section for 6 years. The attraction featured spinning cartoon taxicabs that moved along a track through colorful scenes. Each vehicle could rotate 360 degrees as it progressed through the ride, controlled by a steering wheel inside the cab. Brandon, an energetic preschooler with bright eyes and brown hair, sat in the same cab as his mother. The ride began normally as their yellow taxi entered the first scene. The vehicle spun gently as Brandon's mother turned the wheel. About halfway through the attraction, as the cab made a sharp turn, something went terribly wrong. The small opening between the bottom of the cab door and the ride floor was approximately 7 inches, just large enough for a child's body to pass through. In a moment of excitement or imbalance, Brandon slipped down from his seat. Before his mother could react, he slid through the gap beneath the door. The vehicle's momentum dragged him immediately under the moving cab. The metal undercarriage, weighing over 700 pounds, rolled over Brandon's small body. The crushing force caused catastrophic compression injuries to his chest and abdomen. Most devastating was the oxygen deprivation to his brain, which began the moment his chest was crushed. For approximately 3 minutes, Brandon remained pinned beneath the taxi as the ride continued to operate. Other guests heard his mother's screams but couldn't understand what was happening in the darkened attraction. When operators finally stopped the ride and emergency personnel reached him, Brandon was unconscious. His pulse was faint, his breathing almost imperceptible. Paramedics performed CPR as they rushed him to the hospital. Brandon survived the initial trauma but had suffered irreversible brain damage. For the next 9 years, he remained in a persistent vegetative state, kept alive by feeding tubes and constant care. His body grew, but his mind never recovered. Medical experts explained that each day, his brain cells continued to die from the original injury. On January 26, 2009, at age 13, Brandon's body finally succumbed to pneumonia, a direct complication of his bedridden condition. The official cause of death was listed as complications from anoxic encephalopathy, brain damage caused by oxygen deprivation nearly a decade earlier. Christmas Eve catastrophe. Luan Fee Dawson was 33 years old when he visited Disneyland with his family on December 24, 1998. The holiday crowds filled the park as Dawson, his wife Lu Tui Vuong, and their daughter gathered near the sailing ship Columbia attraction. The Columbia was a full-scale replica of an 18th century sailing vessel that circled the rivers of America. The ship, weighing over 110 tons, was secured to the dock by heavy ropes attached to metal cleats bolted into the wooden deck. At approximately 6:15 p.m., as guests were boarding for the next journey, a cast member attempted to secure one of the mooring lines. The rope being used was not the specified marine-grade nylon, but a cheaper, less flexible polyester substitute that had been installed during recent maintenance. As the massive ship pulled against its moorings, the rope suddenly went taut with over 2,000 pounds of pressure. The strain proved too much for the substandard material. With a sound like a rifle shot, the rope snapped. The release tension sent the heavy metal cleat flying through the air at nearly 100 miles per hour. The 8-pound brass fixture became a deadly projectile, ripping free from its mounting bolts and spinning wildly toward the crowd of waiting guests. Dawson had no time to react. The metal cleat struck him directly in the skull, just above his right temple. The impact crushed his cranial bone inward with such force that bone fragments penetrated 3 inches into his brain. The traumatic injury severed blood vessels and destroyed critical brain tissue instantly. Neurologists later explained that while death was not immediate, consciousness was lost within milliseconds, as intracranial pressure spiked catastrophically. Blood poured from the wound as Dawson collapsed onto the festively decorated dock. His wife, standing just beside him, was also struck by the projectile as it ricocheted. The cleat tore through her cheekbone and jaw, leaving her critically injured but alive. Their young daughter watched in horror as both parents fell. Emergency medical technicians reached Dawson within minutes, but the injury was unsurvivable. Despite being rushed to the nearby UC Irvine Medical Center, he was pronounced dead at 8:48 p.m. Just as Christmas Eve celebrations around the park were reaching their peak, his death marked the first guest fatality at Disneyland directly attributable to mechanical failure rather than guest behavior or pre-existing medical conditions. People Mover Tunnel Crush. Ricky Leyma was 17 years old when he visited Disneyland on a warm August day in 1967. The People Mover attraction, which had opened just the previous year, was a futuristic transportation system that offered guests a leisurely journey through Tomorrowland. The ride consisted of small 4-person cars that moved continuously along an elevated track at a steady 5 miles per hour. There were no doors on the vehicles, just open sides that allowed guests to easily enter and exit at the loading platform. Ricky was with friends that afternoon enjoying the park's attractions. Witnesses later reported seeing the teenagers engaging in horseplay near the People Mover, possibly daring each other to jump between moving cars. This dangerous activity wasn't uncommon among thrill-seeking teens, despite clear warnings against it. As the train of connected cars entered a dark tunnel section near the Adventure Through Inner Space attraction, Ricky made his fateful decision. With his friends watching, he leapt from the platform toward a moving car. The gap between cars was only 18 inches, seemingly easy to cross. But Ricky mistimed his jump. His foot caught the edge of a car, causing him to lose balance. He tumbled downward, falling directly onto the moving track below. The fall itself wasn't far, just 4 feet, but the consequences were immediate and catastrophic. Before Ricky could regain his footing in the darkened tunnel, the next train of people mover cars rounded the bend. The front edge of the first car struck his body, knocking him flat against the track. The undercarriage, with its wheels and mechanical components, passed directly over him. The weight of the car crushed his ribcage, puncturing his lungs and heart, but death didn't come instantly. As Ricky lay injured on the track, unable to move, additional cars continued to pass over him. Each one inflicted new trauma to his already broken body. The ride's mechanical system, designed to move continuously, dragged him along the track for approximately 340 feet through the dark tunnel. Other guests, seated in cars passing through the same tunnel, heard his screams but couldn't see what was happening in the darkness below. When ride operators finally received word of a problem and stopped the attraction, emergency responders found Ricky's body mangled beyond recognition. The medical examiner later determined that he had remained conscious for at least 40 seconds after the initial impact, experiencing the full horror of being crushed and dragged before blood loss and organ damage finally ended his suffering. Monorail track trespass. Thomas Guy Cleveland was 19 years old on June 7, 1966, when he attempted to sneak into Disneyland during the park's annual Grad Night celebration. The special after-hours event was restricted to high school graduates with valid tickets, which Cleveland did not have. Determined to join his friends inside, he devised a plan to bypass the main entrance. The Disneyland Hotel sat just outside park property, separated from Tomorrowland by a 16-foot security fence topped with barbed wire. Around 1 o'clock a.m., Cleveland scaled this imposing barrier, ignoring the clear warning signs posted along its length. The teenager successfully cleared the barbed wire and dropped down onto what appeared to be an empty service road. What he failed to realize was that he had landed directly on the Disneyland Allweg monorail track, an elevated concrete beam that carried the futuristic trains between the hotel and the park. Cleveland began walking along the narrow beam toward Tomorrowland. The concrete track was only 32 inches wide, leaving little room for error. A security guard spotted him and immediately shouted warnings to get down. Cleveland either didn't hear or chose to ignore these calls. He continued forward, unaware that Monorail Red was approaching from behind at approximately 30 miles per hour on its regular late-night circuit. The train's operator spotted Cleveland too late to stop. The monorail, weighing several tons, struck the teenager with tremendous force. The impact shattered his spine and fractured his skull instantly. His body was thrown forward but became caught beneath the front of the train. For approximately 70 feet, Cleveland was dragged along the rough concrete beam, his skin and clothing torn away by the abrasive surface. The friction created by his body against the track actually helped slow the monorail to a stop. When emergency responders reached the scene, they found Cleveland's remains wedged beneath the first car. Medical examiners later determined that while the initial impact caused catastrophic injuries, Cleveland had not died instantly. Blood evidence indicated his heart continued beating for nearly 2 minutes as he was dragged along the track, conscious enough to experience the excruciating pain of having his body systematically shredded by the concrete. The nighttime darkness and the elevation of the track meant that many guests inside the park remained unaware of the tragedy unfolding above them. Cleveland's death occurred as graduation celebrations continued nearby. The juxtaposition of youthful celebration and grim mortality separated by just a few dozen feet of air. The indoor coaster derailment. On June 14, 1986, what began as a typical Saturday at West Edmonton Mall in Alberta, Canada, became a nightmare for visitors. The 3 victims were among the passengers aboard the Mindbender, the world's largest indoor triple-loop roller coaster. The massive attraction was the centerpiece of the mall's Fantasyland amusement park, reaching speeds of 60 miles per hour. That evening, the final train of the day was loaded with 12 passengers. As it climbed the first hill, several riders reported hearing unusual clicking sounds. The 4-car train completed its first 2 inversions without incident. Then, as it approached the 3rd loop at approximately 7:15 in the evening, disaster struck. The last car, carrying 4 passengers, suddenly disconnected from the train. Investigation would later reveal that 4 critical bolts had worked loose from the wheel assembly. The detached car derailed, slamming into a concrete pillar at full speed. The impact was so violent that the metal frame of the car crumpled instantly. Inside that final car, the passengers experienced a moment of weightlessness as the wheels left the track. They had just seconds to process what was happening. The sensation of freefall ended with a crushing impact that shattered the car's fiberglass shell. The passengers remained conscious through the initial collision. The car then plummeted 40 feet to the concrete floor below. Witnesses described seeing bodies thrown from the wreckage like rag dolls. The sound of twisting metal and screams echoed throughout the cavernous mall. Other shoppers watched in horror, unable to help. First responders rushed to the scene, but it was already too late for 3 of the 4 passengers. The fourth, a 13-year-old girl, survived with severe injuries. Cindy Sims, age 26, David Sager, age 24, and Tony Merckx, age 21, had all suffered catastrophic head trauma and internal injuries. Their final conscious moments were filled with the terrifying awareness of being ejected from a roller coaster at high speed with no possible escape. The fatal plunge from the Freefall. On March 24, 2022, visitors at Icon Park in Orlando, Florida witnessed one of the most disturbing amusement park accidents in recent memory. Tyre was a 14-year-old boy visiting from Missouri with his football team. He was a gifted athlete at 6 feet 5 inches tall and weighing over 300 pounds. That evening, he boarded the Orlando Freefall, advertised as the world's tallest freestanding drop tower. The ride lifted passengers 430 feet into the air before plummeting them toward the ground at 75 miles per hour. As the ride began its ascent, Tyre was already expressing concern. Other passengers later reported hearing him ask the attendant if he was secured properly. The attendant assured him he was safe. The ride reached its maximum height, paused briefly, then began its rapid descent. Witnesses described the moment with horror. As the ride accelerated downward, Tyre's harness shifted. He slipped forward, then sideways. In the final seconds, he desperately gripped the safety restraint. His knuckles went white from the effort. His face showed pure terror as he realized what was happening. Other riders screamed as they watched him struggle. The gap between his body and the restraint grew wider. At approximately halfway down the tower, the forces became too much. Tyre lost his grip and was thrown from the seat. He was conscious and aware as he fell more than 100 feet through the air. Spectators heard his screams cut abruptly short when he struck the pavement below. First responders arrived within minutes, but Tyre showed no signs of life. The impact had caused immediate and overwhelming internal damage. Later investigation revealed the ride operator had manually adjusted the seat's proximity sensor, creating a 7-inch gap in the safety harness. This alteration allowed the oversized restraint to indicate it was securely closed, when in reality, it left enough space for Tyre's body to slip through during the forceful deceleration. The electrified kayak ride. On July 27, 1982, a summer day at Action Park in Vernon Township, New Jersey, turned deadly. Jeffrey was a 27-year-old visiting the notorious park, known locally as Traction Park or Accident Park, due to its alarming injury rate. That afternoon, he decided to try the kayak experience, a whitewater rafting attraction featuring individual kayaks navigating through turbulent rapids. The ride used a complex system of underwater fans to create artificial currents, generating waves and rapids in what was otherwise a calm water channel. These fans were powered by electrical lines running beneath the water's surface. The ride had been operating without incident that day, with hundreds of guests experiencing the artificial rapids without any sign of danger. Jeffrey paddled his kayak into the main channel around 2:30 in the afternoon. Witnesses said he seemed to be enjoying himself, navigating the first set of rapids successfully. As he approached the second section, his kayak suddenly capsized in one of the stronger current areas. This was a common occurrence on the ride, and most guests simply righted their kayaks and continued. But when Jeffrey fell into the water, something was terribly wrong. His body immediately stiffened. Other guests noticed him thrashing in the water, his muscles contracting involuntarily. Jeffrey was fully conscious as electricity coursed through his body. His eyes were wide open, his mouth locked in a silent scream. He could feel every muscle in his body seizing simultaneously. Nearby riders tried to help, but received painful shocks when they touched the water. Park employees rushed to shut down the power, but crucial seconds ticked by. Jeffrey remained conscious through most of the electrocution, experiencing the sensation of his heart rhythm disrupting and his lungs paralyzing. Unable to breathe or call for help, he remained aware as his body began to shut down. By the time the electricity was cut off and staff pulled him from the water, Jeffrey's heart had already stopped. The fatal pond rescue. On June 9, 1991, a summer evening at Kings Island Amusement Park in Mason, Ohio, turned into a scene of cascading tragedy. William was a 20-year-old visiting with friends. Daryl was a 21-year-old park employee working as a groundskeeper. Neither man knew the other, but their fates would intertwine in the shallow waters of the park's decorative pond. The pond was located in the Oktoberfest section of the park, a popular area filled with German-themed attractions and food stands. Beneath its placid surface, submerged electrical pumps powered the water features. Around 9:30, a guest accidentally dropped a souvenir cup into the water. Attempting to retrieve it, he stepped into the pond. Immediately, he began to convulse. Unknown to anyone, a faulty underwater pump had developed an electrical short. The current had electrified the entire pond. The guests' screams drew attention from nearby visitors. William Haithcote, seeing the man in distress, immediately jumped into the water to help. The moment he entered the water, the electricity seized his body. His muscles locked instantly. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. Daryl Robertson, working nearby, heard the commotion and ran to assist. Without hesitation, he too jumped into the pond. The current gripped him immediately. Both men remained conscious, their nervous systems overwhelmed by the continuous electrical flow. Their hearts began to fibrillate. They could feel their breathing muscles paralyze. Their minds remained alert as their bodies failed them. Witnesses described the haunting sight of both men shuddering in the water, unable to call for help or pull themselves free. Park officials frantically searched for the emergency shutoff. Other employees tried using wooden poles to pull the men out, but the positioning made rescue impossible. For nearly 3 minutes, both men endured the continuous current. When the power was finally cut, William and Daryl had already suffered fatal cardiac arrhythmias. The original guest survived with severe injuries. The coaster intruder decapitation. On June 28, 2008, a summer afternoon at Six Flags Over Georgia ended in one of the most gruesome amusement park deaths ever recorded. Asia was a 17-year-old high school student visiting the park with friends from nearby Springfield, South Carolina. He was described by teachers as bright and athletic, with plans to join the military after graduation. The Batman. The ride roller coaster was one of the park's most popular attractions, an inverted coaster where riders' feet dangle freely beneath them. The coaster reached speeds of 50 miles per hour and featured multiple inversions through its twisted track. Like all modern coasters, it had clearly marked restricted zones underneath and around the ride structure. Around 2 in the afternoon, Asia and a friend decided to retrieve a hat that had fallen off during an earlier ride. Despite 2 6-foot security fences and numerous warning signs, they entered the restricted zone beneath the coaster track. His friend stopped, sensing danger. Asia continued forward, moving deeper into the mechanical maze. The ride was in full operation, with loaded trains dispatched every 90 seconds. Asia was reportedly looking up, scanning the ground for the lost hat. He never heard the approaching train. Witnesses on the ride described seeing a figure suddenly appear beneath them. The train, carrying 32 passengers, was midway through its course. Asia looked up at the last possible second. His eyes widened with sudden recognition of his situation. In that final moment, he attempted to duck, but his reaction came too late. The dangling legs of front row riders struck him at full speed. The impact was immediate and overwhelming. The force was so severe that Asia's head was completely severed from his body. Riders on the coaster felt a sudden jolt and reported seeing a flash of what happened below them. Many were covered with blood. When the ride completed its circuit, the passengers were in shock. The coaster was immediately shut down. First responders arrived to find a scene so disturbing that several required counseling afterward. The simulator cabin collapse. On June 29, 2010, a routine day at the overseas Chinese town East theme park in Shenzhen, China, became the site of mechanical carnage. The 6 victims were among 44 passengers aboard the Space Journey attraction, a rocket launch simulator that combined centrifugal force with video projections to create the illusion of space travel. The ride consisted of 10 individual cabins arranged in a circle, each holding 4 to 6 riders. These cabins rotated around a central axis while simultaneously tilting and spinning to simulate the sensation of a rocket launch. The entire apparatus was suspended 15 meters above the ground and enclosed in a dome theater. At approximately 6:45 in the evening, the ride was operating at full capacity. Halfway through the simulation, as the cabins reached maximum rotation speed of 30 revolutions per minute, passengers heard a loud metallic snap. One of the cabins had broken free from its mounting bracket. The cabin containing 6 passengers was flung outward by centrifugal force. Inside the detached cabin, the occupants immediately sensed something was wrong. The normal gravitational forces suddenly intensified. Their bodies pressed against the restraints with crushing pressure. For a brief moment, they experienced weightlessness as the cabin broke free, followed by the terrifying sensation of uncontrolled flight. The cabin struck a supporting pillar before crashing into other cabins still attached to the ride. The impact sheared through the metal framework, causing a catastrophic chain reaction. Additional cabins broke loose. The central axis began to collapse. Inside the failing structure, passengers were fully aware of what was happening, but powerless to escape. Those in the detached cabins felt every jarring impact as their enclosures were smashed against hard surfaces. Metal fragments tore through the cabin interiors. The bodies inside were subjected to extreme gravitational forces, rupturing organs and breaking bones. When emergency personnel finally reached the wreckage, they found a tangle of twisted metal and broken machinery. 6 people had been crushed to death by the combined effects of impact trauma and mechanical compression. The Matterhorn ejection. Dolly Young was 48 years old when she visited Disneyland in January of 1984. The Matterhorn bobsleds had been operating since 1959, becoming one of the park's signature attractions. Young boarded the bobsled with a friend on what should have been a routine 3-minute ride through the artificial mountain's twisting track. The Matterhorn featured tandem seating in its bobsleds, with each passenger secured by individual lap belts. Young sat in the rear position of her bobsled. As the vehicle climbed the first lift hill, other guests noticed nothing unusual about her behavior. behavior. The ride reached its peak and began its rapid descent through the mountain's interior somewhere during the first major curve. Young apparently unbuckled her safety belt. Park officials never determined why she removed this crucial restraint. The bobsled entered one of the ride's sharp turns at approximately 25 miles per hour. Without the lap belt securing her body, the centrifugal force pulled Young toward the outside of the curve. In a matter of seconds, she was thrown from the vehicle. Guests in trailing bobsleds heard a sudden scream cut short. Young landed directly on the metal track, the impact causing immediate trauma, but not instant death. She was conscious, dazed, and unable to move from her position. The fall alone would have been survivable. What the falling passenger couldn't see was the next bobsled rapidly approaching from behind. Each vehicle on the Matterhorn was dispatched at precise 30-second intervals. The oncoming bobsled's operator had no ability to stop. Young was still conscious on the track when she heard the rumble of the approaching vehicle. For a brief moment, she was aware of her situation, but completely helpless to escape it. The bobsled struck her body at full speed, crushing her against the metal track. The impact caused catastrophic internal injuries. Other guests on the ride described hearing a distinct sound, followed by the vehicle shuddering as it passed over her body. Dolly Young was pronounced dead at the scene when emergency responders finally reached her. Crushed by the rotating theater. On July 8, 1974, what began as an ordinary workday at Disneyland ended in unimaginable suffering. Deborah was an 18-year-old hostess recently hired for the summer season at the park in Anaheim, California. She was assigned to the America Sings attraction, a newly opened theater show featuring audio animatronic animals performing patriotic songs. The attraction consisted of a rotating central audience section surrounded by 6 stationary stages. Between shows, the outer ring rotated counterclockwise, while the inner audience section turned clockwise. This created narrow gaps that would appear and disappear as the walls moved past each other. These gaps measured only 9 inches at their widest point, barely visible in the dim lighting. At approximately 9:15 in the evening, Deborah was standing between sections 1 and 2. The exact reason why remains unclear. Some reports suggest she was reaching for a guest-dropped item. Others indicate she was simply moving between sections. As the walls began their rotation, Deborah stepped forward. In that split second, she made a fatal miscalculation. The gap was already closing. Deborah became aware of her situation immediately, as the pressure began against her body. She tried to push back, but the massive walls continued their predetermined path. The mechanical force was relentless. Guests in the theater heard her screams echoing through the building. Many thought it was part of the show, a sound effect meant to startle the audience. The walls continued closing. The pressure against Deborah's chest increased until breathing became impossible. Her ribcage cracked under the force, one bone at a time. The grinding mechanism continued pushing, crushing her internal organs. Her screams suddenly stopped. When fellow cast members finally realized what had happened and shut down the ride, they discovered Deborah's body compressed between the walls, her features distorted from the pressure that had squeezed the life from her. Verrückt slide incident. On August 7, 2016, visitors at the Schlitterbahn water park in Kansas City witnessed one of the most horrific water park accidents in history. The Verrückt water slide stood 17 stories high, making it the tallest in the world. Its name, German for insane, would prove tragically appropriate. The massive slide featured a 50-foot drop, followed by a second hill designed to give riders a momentary feeling of weightlessness before splashing down in a pool below. 10-year-old Caleb Schwab, son of Kansas State Representative Scott Schwab, boarded a raft with 2 adult women for what should have been an exhilarating ride. The 3-person raft accelerated down the initial drop, reaching speeds of over 65 miles per hour. As it approached the second hill, something went catastrophically wrong. The lightweight raft, carrying the small boy in the front position, became airborne. What happened next shocked everyone present. The boy's head struck one of the metal hoops supporting the safety netting above the slide. The impact was instantaneous and catastrophic. The force completely severed his head from his body in what medical examiners later classified as a transection of the cervical spine and skull. His decapitated body continued down the slide in the raft, leaving a trail of blood. Witnesses reported hearing screams, then seeing the women in the raft emerge covered in blood. Park staff quickly evacuated the area, but it was far too late. Investigators later discovered that park officials had documented multiple incidents of rafts going airborne on the same section of the slide, yet continued operation. The ride, once marketed as an engineering marvel, had become a deadly trap that claimed the life of a child in the most gruesome way imaginable. Bonsai Pipeline incident. On June 2, 1997, a celebratory day at Waterworld USA in Concord, California, turned tragic in a matter of seconds. The Bonsai Pipeline was a 4-story water slide designed to safely carry a small number of riders at once. Built with fiberglass and steel supports, it had operated without incident since the park's opening. That afternoon, dozens of high school seniors from Napa High School arrived at the park for a year-end celebration. Around 2:30 p.m., approximately 30 seniors gathered at the top of the slide. Despite repeated warnings from lifeguards that the slide could only safely hold a few people, the students decided to attempt a class record by sliding down together simultaneously. As they crowded onto the slide, the combined weight exceeded 2,000 pounds, far beyond its design capacity. 17-year-old Quimby Galati joined her classmates on the overcrowded attraction. Moments after they began sliding, a terrifying cracking sound echoed through the park. A section of the slide's support structure gave way under the excessive weight. The fiberglass flume fractured completely, causing the entire section to collapse. Students plunged 30 feet to the concrete below. Screams filled the air as bodies fell in a chaotic tangle of limbs and broken slide fragments. Galati took the worst of the impact. First responders arrived quickly, but for Galati, it was already too late. She had suffered catastrophic head and neck injuries upon impact with the concrete. Despite frantic resuscitation attempts, she was pronounced dead at the scene. Dozens of her classmates suffered serious injuries, including broken bones, internal bleeding, and concussions. What began as a celebration became a lesson in the fatal consequences of ignoring safety warnings. Thunder River Rapids incident. On October 25, 2016, Dreamworld theme park in Queensland, Australia became the site of one of the country's worst amusement park disasters. The Thunder River Rapids ride was a family attraction that simulated a whitewater rafting experience. 6-person circular rafts floated along a conveyor belt through artificial rapids. The ride was considered one of the safest in the park, with a history of over 30 years of operation. At approximately 2:20 p.m., a critical water pump failed, causing water levels to drop dramatically within seconds. The sudden lack of water left one raft stranded on the conveyor belt near the unloading area. The automated system continued to operate, sending another raft toward the same location. The second raft, carrying 6 passengers, collided with the stranded one and became caught in the conveyor mechanism. The raft was lifted and pivoted to an almost vertical position. 4 adults, Cindy Lowe, Kate Goodchild, Luke Dorset, and Ruzi Aragi, were thrown into the machinery below. The metal components of the conveyor system and the mechanical gears created a deadly trap. Their bodies were caught between the raft and the conveyor belt's moving parts, causing catastrophic crushing injuries. Witnesses described hearing screaming that suddenly stopped. Park staff rushed to shut down the ride, but the mechanism took nearly a minute to fully stop. By then, all 4 victims had suffered fatal compressive trauma and asphyxiation. Medical examiners later confirmed that death occurred within seconds due to severe thoracic compression that made breathing impossible. 2 children who remained in the raft survived only because their smaller size allowed them to avoid being pulled into the machinery. They watched helplessly as the adults died before their eyes. Volcano slide incident. On February 24, 2012, a maintenance oversight at the Derailment Aqua Park in Caldas Novas, Brazil, led to one of the most preventable water park tragedies on record. The volcano was a towering water attraction designed to look like an erupting mountain, with multiple slides winding down from the summit. That day, sections of the slide were undergoing routine maintenance, with several pipe segments removed for repair. 8-year-old Davy Lucas D. Miranda arrived at the park with his family for what should have been a day of fun. While his parents were momentarily distracted, Davy wandered away from the open attractions. Despite maintenance barriers that should have prevented access, he managed to climb the stairs leading to the partially dismantled volcano slide. No staff members were positioned to stop him. At the top, Davy entered one of the slide's tunnels and pushed off. For the first few seconds, the ride seemed normal as he slid down the enclosed tube. Then suddenly, he reached a section where the connecting pipes had been removed. There was nothing to contain his momentum. Davy plummeted 15 meters through open air, his body free-falling until it struck the concrete foundation below. Park visitors heard the impact and rushed to the scene. Davy was still breathing, but barely. His skull had fractured in multiple places, and he suffered severe internal injuries. Blood pooled around his small body as staff frantically called for emergency services. Despite being rushed to the hospital, the trauma was too severe. Davy's brain had suffered catastrophic hemorrhaging. He died 3 hours later without regaining consciousness. Park officials later admitted they had failed to secure the maintenance area properly, turning a simple repair job into a deadly trap. Wild Waves activity pool incident. On August 6, 2016, a crowded Saturday at the Wild Waves theme park in Federal Way, Washington became the setting for a drowning that went unnoticed for nearly 15 minutes. The activity pool was one of the park's most popular attractions, a 500,000-gallon pool with simulated waves and depths ranging from 3 to 10 feet. On busy days, hundreds of guests would pack the water, making it difficult for lifeguards to monitor everyone. Vijayarangan Srinivasan, a 32-year-old software engineer who had recently moved from India, was enjoying the pool with friends. As the wave machine activated, the already crowded conditions became more chaotic. At approximately 5:30 p.m., Srinivasan disappeared beneath the surface in the deepest section of the pool. The churning water and limited visibility meant no one immediately noticed his absence. What happened next was a catastrophic failure of oversight. Several children in the pool spotted a body on the bottom and repeatedly alerted a nearby lifeguard. According to witness statements, the lifeguard dismissed their concerns, assuming they were playing a prank. For nearly 15 minutes, Srinivasan remained submerged in 10 feet of water as hundreds of people swam above him. Medical experts later explained that drowning victims can experience consciousness for up to 2 minutes underwater. Srinivasan would have felt the burning sensation of water entering his lungs, followed by intense panic and pain as his body fought for oxygen. By the time another guest finally spotted and identified his body as real, brain death had already occurred. Despite being pulled from the water and receiving CPR, he was pronounced dead at the hospital. His body had been within sight the entire time, hidden in plain view beneath the feet of unaware swimmers. Indiana Log Incident. On October 23, 2007, Australia's Jamberoo Action Park became the scene of a devastating mechanical failure. The Indiana Log was a popular flume-style ride that carried boat-shaped vehicles along a water channel, culminating in a steep 20-meter drop into a splash pool. The attraction relied on powerful water pumps to maintain sufficient water volume for a safe descent. That day, the ride had been operating normally for hours. At approximately 1:15 p.m., a critical mechanical failure occurred in the main water pump system. The water level at the bottom of the final drop began to decrease rapidly. Park engineers were unaware of the malfunction, as there was no automated shutdown system linked to water level sensors. A logboat carrying 4 passengers, including a 35-year-old woman, had already begun its climb to the peak of the attraction. As the boat crested the top of the final drop, the passengers had no way of knowing what awaited them below. Instead of the usual deep cushion of water to slow their descent, they were about to plummet onto an almost dry concrete trough. The boat accelerated down the slide at approximately 45 miles per hour, striking the nearly empty channel with devastating force. The impact shattered the fiberglass boat and ejected all passengers. The 35-year-old woman took the brunt of the collision, her head striking the concrete surface directly. The force caused immediate and catastrophic cranial trauma. Other passengers suffered serious injuries but remained conscious. They reported hearing a single crack, the sound of her skull fracturing, followed by silence. Park staff rushed to the scene and attempted CPR, but the woman's injuries were unsurvivable. She had suffered complete cerebral herniation from the impact. The brain trauma was so severe that she died within minutes, as the ride that was designed for fun became a deadly freefall. Pluto character crushed. On February 11, 2004, Javier Cruz arrived for his shift at the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World. He was a cast member assigned to perform as Pluto during the Share a Dream Come True parade. It was a routine day. He had worn the costume dozens of times before in his 8 years with Disney, greeting children and posing for photographs throughout the park. That afternoon, Cruz dressed in the full Pluto costume backstage. The parade float was being positioned for its entry into the park. The multi-section vehicle moved slowly through the staging area as cast members prepared for the 3 o'clock parade. Cruz walked alongside the 3-part articulated float. The costume was heavy and restricted his vision. He could only see directly in front of him through a small mesh screen in the character's neck, with zero peripheral vision. As the float continued moving at walking speed through the backstage area near Frontierland, something went wrong. Cruz was walking between the second and third sections of the float when his right foot became entangled with the third segment. He lost his balance and fell. The 6,000-pound section of the parade float rolled over him, pinning him beneath the frame. Fellow cast members witnessed the accident. They called for help, but the massive weight of the float had already caused fatal injuries. By the time the float came to a halt, Cruz had been killed. A handful of coworkers stood nearby in shock. The incident happened out of sight of park guests in the backstage area near Splash Mountain. The floats ahead of Cruz continued down the parade route toward Main Street, but those behind him did not proceed. An investigation followed. The Orange County Sheriff's Office ruled the death accidental. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration later determined that employees frequently violated safety guidelines about maintaining distance from moving floats, and that supervisors had not adequately enforced these rules. Disney was fined $6,300. Javier Cruz, 38 years old and father of 2, had been killed by the vehicle that was meant to bring joy to thousands of visitors' stuntman's fatal tumble. On August 17, 2009, Anislav Varbanov was rehearsing at Disney's Hollywood Studios. He was a professional stunt performer, preparing for the Indiana Jones Epic Stunt Spectacular. The show featured elaborate fight sequences, explosions, and acrobatic maneuvers that thrilled audiences daily. Varbanov was an experienced performer, though he had only been with this particular show for 1 week. He was familiar with the movements and techniques required for the stunts. That evening, after 7 o'clock, he was practicing a tumbling roll. It was a standard maneuver in the show's combat sequence. The move required him to jump into the air, dive over another performer, then tuck and roll across the mat before springing back to his feet. The stunt had been performed successfully thousands of times since the show began in 1989. For a trained performer, it was considered routine. Verbanov began his approach. He launched into the dive, but something went wrong during the execution. He sustained a severe head injury and broke his neck. Disney workers dialed 911 at 7:34 in the evening to report that a cast member had sustained a head injury. While waiting for paramedics, dispatchers walked the performers through CPR techniques. Paramedics from Reedy Creek Emergency Services arrived approximately 11 and a half minutes later. They transported him to Florida Hospital Celebration Health. At 8:53 that evening, approximately 1 hour and 20 minutes after the injury, Anislav Varbanov was pronounced dead. The Orange Osceola County medical examiner later ruled the cause of death as accidental, resulting from a broken neck. The show was canceled the following day as cast members mourned the loss of their colleague. He was 30 years old. Monorail pilot collision. On July 5th, 2009, Austin Wenenberg was working the late shift as a monorail pilot at Walt Disney World. He was 21 years old and was piloting trains on the Epcot line. It was around 2 in the morning when the Transportation and Ticket Center became the site of an accident. He was operating the purple monorail. The night shift was routine. Trains were being transferred to storage as the park closed. Wenenberg followed standard procedures as he operated his train. What no one realized was that a critical error had occurred in the control tower. The track switch had not been properly aligned. The shop panel operator had been interrupted while configuring the switch and mistakenly reported it was set. At the same moment, the pink monorail had been authorized to reverse along the track. The manager supervising the transfer was at a restaurant off Disney property. There was no final verification, no visual confirmation, no time to prevent what came next. The pink monorail backed into the purple monorail. The collision was severe and instantaneous. One operating cab from each monorail was destroyed. Emergency responders had to cut Wenenberg from the wreckage. Wenenberg had attempted to reverse his train when he realized the collision was imminent, but it was too late. He died at the scene from multiple traumatic injuries. 6 guests who had been aboard the trains were treated at the scene and released without serious injury. The operator of the pink monorail was uninjured but was taken to a hospital due to emotional distress. The National Transportation Safety Board conducted a full investigation. They found no mechanical failures. The collision had been caused by human error. The failure to properly align the switch beam before authorizing the reverse movement. The automatic collision prevention system had been overridden for end-of-night operations. It was the first fatal monorail accident in the resort's 38-year history. Disney was later fined for safety violations and settled a wrongful death lawsuit with Wenenberg's family. Mechanic trapped under vehicle. On July 9, 2018, Juan Alberto Ojeda was working at Disney's Pop Century Resort. He was a vehicle technician responsible for servicing utility vehicles used throughout the property. That morning, he was performing work on a Toro motorized utility cart in a backstage maintenance area between Pop Century and Caribbean Beach resorts. The vehicle's battery needed servicing. Ojeda was working on the vehicle when it unexpectedly moved. Witnesses 20 yards away heard a screeching sound. The vehicle drove up onto a nearby curb and climbed into a chain link fence, rising 3 to 6 feet before falling back down. The cart landed on top of Ojeda, trapping him beneath its weight. Danny Vasquez, who had been showing new hire Josh Wilner around the facility, saw the accident unfold from 20 yards away. They rushed over immediately. Ojeda was conscious and asked them to back the cart off him. The 2 men worried they would cause further injury if they moved the vehicle. The cart was still running, so they turned it off first. They tried to lift it manually, but it was too heavy. Ojeda told them he could not breathe, then lost consciousness. Vasquez and Wilner were unable to free him without proper equipment. The vehicle remained on top of him. Emergency responders were contacted. The Reedy Creek Fire Department arrived and engaged the vehicle's emergency brake. They began rescue procedures. Juan Alberto Ojeda was pronounced dead at the scene around 9:30 that morning. The maintenance job had resulted in a fatal industrial accident. The Orange County Sheriff's Office and OSHA initiated investigations into the circumstances surrounding his death. Primeval Whirl platform fall. On November 29, 2007, Karen Price was working at Disney's Animal Kingdom. She was a 63-year-old park employee assigned to the Primeval Whirl ride in the Dinoland USA section. The attraction featured spinning cars that traveled along a winding track. That afternoon, Price was stationed on an elevated loading platform where she assisted guests boarding the ride vehicles. She was performing her regular duties as a ride attendant. Price was loading guests onto the attraction when a moving ride vehicle approached. She was leaning over one of the vehicles when it began moving forward. forward. The car pushed her 10 feet along the platform before she fell off the edge. She dropped 3 feet and hit the ground below. Her head struck the surface. The injury was immediate and severe. She suffered a skull fracture from the impact. Park staff called for emergency medical assistance. Paramedics transported her to the hospital. At the scene, she was conscious, alert, and talking. Doctors examined her and found trauma to her brain. The fall had caused a head injury that would prove critical. Price was placed under medical care. Her family gathered at the hospital as her condition was monitored. Initially stable, her condition began to deteriorate by Wednesday. The injury had caused complications that doctors could not reverse. 5 days after the accident, Karen Price died from her injuries. The head trauma from the fall had been unsurvivable. Her death led to immediate safety reviews at the attraction. Investigators from the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration examined the circumstances. Disney was cited with 5 workplace safety violations and proposed fines totaling $21,500. The company installed sensor mats in restricted areas that would automatically shut down the ride if someone stepped on them. Disney extended the platform, added striping to mark safe zones, and modified the ride controls to give operators more manual control over vehicle movements. These changes were implemented to prevent similar accidents and protect employees working at the attraction. Drowned in Castle Moat. On August 11, 1977, the Good family visited the Magic Kingdom. It was evening, and the park was filled with guests. Joel Good was 4 years old. He walked alongside his mother Marietta and other relatives near Cinderella Castle. The family had gathered near an ice cream shop where Mrs. Good sat at a table bordering a grassy, fenced-in area where Joel and his 13-year-old cousin played inside the fenced space. For just a moment, no one was watching Joel. The boy wandered away from the play area toward the castle. A decorative moat encircled the structure, adding to the fairy tale atmosphere. To reach the water's edge, Joel would have needed to climb out of the fenced area, cross a walkway, climb over a second fence, and traverse more grass and shrubbery before reaching the moat. The barrier was only 31 inches high, with a stepping distance of just 24 inches between the bottom and top rails, low enough for small children to scale easily. Joel approached the water's edge. Then he fell in. The water was approximately 5 feet deep, with a current flowing from east to west. Joel disappeared beneath the surface. No one witnessed what happened. No splash drew attention from passers-by. The evening continued around the moat, guests unaware that a child had fallen into the water only feet away. The park remained active as Joel's life ended in silence. His mother realized he was missing shortly after 11 p.m. She searched frantically, asking cast members and security for help. Announcements were made over the park's communications system. Staff combed the area through the night. Protocol eventually required divers to search the moat. At approximately 2:15 in the morning, a diver found Joel's body submerged in 5 feet of water, approximately 150 feet east of where he was last seen. He had drowned alone while hundreds of people celebrated around him. An autopsy confirmed drowning as the cause of death, with no evidence of foul play. It remains one of the most heartbreaking guest incidents in the park's early history, stabbing in Tomorrowland. On March 7, 1981, Mel Yorba visited Disneyland with friends. He was 18 years old and attending a private party held at the park that evening. The event was hosted by Roar Corporation, a Southern California aerospace company, and distributed approximately 10,000 tickets to employees and their families. Yorba's father worked at Roar. Yorba and his group spent time near the Matterhorn bobsleds, enjoying the rides and atmosphere. It was supposed to be a celebration. Around 10 o'clock that night, a confrontation began. A woman told her boyfriend, 28-year-old James O'Driscoll, that a man had pinched her. O'Driscoll confronted Yorba, believing he was responsible. Yorba punched O'Driscoll in the face. Within moments, the two men were on the ground fighting. The confrontation moved near the submarine voyage ride. Then O'Driscoll pulled out a knife and stabbed Yorba in the chest. Yorba collapsed onto the pavement in Tomorrowland as horrified onlookers screamed for help. Blood spread rapidly across his shirt and pooled beneath him on the concrete. Security personnel rushed to the scene and found Yorba lying on the ground, conscious but struggling to breathe. For approximately 20 minutes, he lay there bleeding. But Disneyland refused to call 911. Instead of summoning paramedics, security placed him in a Disneyland van with 2 guards and a park nurse. The van had no medical equipment, no sirens, no lights. It drove through traffic, bypassing 2 trauma centers, taking him to Palm Harbor Hospital in Garden Grove. The van transport took 11 minutes. Yorba was already in cardiac arrest when he arrived at the hospital. An Orange County coroner later determined there was nothing that could be done. Mel Yorba died 15 minutes after arrival. It was the first homicide ever committed inside Disneyland. O'Driscoll fled into the park, threw the knife into Sleeping Beauty Castle's moat, and hid in bushes. He was arrested 90 minutes later. Through 2 trials, O'Driscoll maintained the stabbing was accidental. After a hung jury in the first trial, he was convicted of second-degree murder in the second, and sentenced to 16 years in prison prison, Skyway Cleaner Falls. On a morning in February 1999, Raymond Barlow arrived for his shift at the Magic Kingdom. He was 65 years old and worked as a part-time custodian for the park. That day, he was assigned to clean the Skyway attraction, a gondola ride that transported guests high above the park between Tomorrowland and Fantasyland. The ride offered aerial views of the castle and surrounding areas. It had been operating for decades. Barlow climbed onto one of the elevated platforms to begin his cleaning routine. The platform was used for maintenance access and was inaccessible to park guests. He began sweeping water from the queue line. The park had already opened at 9 o'clock that morning, and the accident occurred at 9:50. He had performed this same task many times before without incident. What Barlow did not know was that someone had activated the ride system. The gondolas began moving along the cable. The ride had been turned on for testing before guests would board at 10 o'clock. Cast members were unaware of his presence on the platform. He did not hear the warning. He did not see the gondola approaching from behind. The moving cabin struck him suddenly. The force knocked him off balance and swept him off his feet. He was carried outward over the edge of the platform, clinging desperately to the gondola as it moved away from the station. Below him was a drop of 40 feet. He struggled to pull himself inside the cabin but could not lift himself up. For more than a minute, he hung on the outside of the moving gondola. His grip weakened. He appeared to be looking for a safe place to fall and let go over a flower bed rather than the concrete below. His hands slipped from the metal frame. Barlow fell through the air, snapping tree branches on the way down. He landed in the flower bed near the Dumbo ride. The impact caused severe trauma throughout his body. He was airlifted to Orlando Regional Medical Center, where he died a short time later. The Skyway attraction was closed for investigation. Federal safety officials later determined the work area violated safety codes and fined Disney $4,500. Later that same year, Disney permanently shut down the ride. It never reopened.